But yes, linking onto sort of these points we were saying, it made me think that I guess it's almost this sort of romanticisation, I guess, of people when they are unwell, and it's sort of, I guess, maybe for the example of like the depressed writer sat smoking and drinking a glass of red wine, and how it's this sudden explosion of creativity, and equally sort of this idea that if you are able to function, like we said with the supermarket example, if you're able to function in sort of any way whatsoever to do sort of what people would see as tasks to keep on going, to function as a member of society, then that's sort of deemed that you can't clearly be doing badly enough. And I can't remember where I heard it, but it made me think of this sort of analogy to a plate, and it's sort of saying how we're all, everyone has sort of a plate in a way, and it's sort of a reference to your mental health and sort of how much stresses that different people can cope with, and it's sort of at a certain point that plate will break, and that might be when you have an episode you need to seek sort of quite significant treatments to sort of get it back together. But from then onwards you're sort of a bit more likely to have an episode again because you've been pushed that far down, a
bit more fragile.
Yes, it's sort of whereas if someone had been able to intervene earlier to take some of these stresses off, some of these pressures off, you can sort of keep this resilience built up. Because it's sort of, people almost are waiting for it to get so bad that you stop, and then that's when it's seen as you're unwell enough. Whereas, like you said, if it's more normalised to be able to see a counsellor not as a form of treatment, but as almost a form of resilience building, and a way of just strengthening people up, allowing people to work, like problem solve almost in a way. But it's not as sort of simple as that. That it can sort of prevent people having to then seek it as a form of sort of someone to fix me, because I do think there's still that sort of idea that you only go to a therapist if you're a broken thing that needs to be fixed, just like a medicine or fiction. It's sort of, well, no, that's only sort of part of the recovery thing, and it's all the other little elements of recovery that do fall into place.
Definitely. And I think, again, sort of picking up on what you said about going to see a therapist to fix me, I think that is the way a lot of people do believe that that people are there to do, but actually it's about fixing yourself. It's about being given the skills and the empowerment to do it yourself. And I know that's again a bit of a cliche, but so many times I've had patients who will say, oh, I've had talking therapy, didn't do anything for me, didn't help, it's a load of rubbish, useless, all of that sort of quote. And the point is, they're just not ready. They're just not ready. I do agree sometimes they do unfortunately come across, shall we say, some duff counsellors who maybe have been taught and have passed their exams, but are not maybe very good with building the rapport with that particular client. And often you change the counsellor, or with a different client, and actually things can work better. But there's no doubt that in my mind that there are some patients who are just not ready, and it's about getting them ready to I think understand that they've got to help themselves as well. It is about you're given the tools, and then you have to use those tools to help yourself. There's no magic bullet.
It's so true, and sort of, I guess that's part of the difficulty almost then, is when people are getting so far down these paths that they are then unable to sort of look after themselves in a way. And I guess it's almost that self-fulfilling prophecy all over again.
It is, and then people then inevitably become medicalised very easily, because they move into a space where they don't believe that talking therapy will help them. And it may be that for some people they do need some medication, and they do need some extra help, but they then do become in that space where it's got to be something that then is given to them by a psychiatrist. They have to sort of have that tablet, they have to have that medicalisation label, and it isn't again necessarily the right thing for everybody. You've got to be so careful that you don't overdiagnose people when all they haven't done is they haven't got into that space where they genuinely actually want to seek the ability to get better themselves. And that sounds like I'm saying that it's people's fault that they keep themselves ill, which I'm not at all, because for some people they just can't help it. That is the way they are. But they've also got to be willing and able to accept the help that's given to them.
It's so true. And when you do come to therapies and things like this, you can have the absolute best person in the world, but whilst people are still going in either not ready or expecting this other person to do all the work for them, then they aren't going to see these results. And I guess with medication, yes, it's right for some people, but to rely solely on it can become a bit of a dangerous game of not preparing yourself in the best way possible. Why not access all the instruments and the toolkits when they're sort of there available to you? And I guess while we're on the topic of medication, I know it could be an idea to sort of have a look, I guess, sort of this interrelation between mental health and physical health, because I am aware that medication can sometimes have these sort of negative side effects on physical health, which can cause people other issues. And I guess if you're then not in that sort of space where you're able to take an active role, I guess, in your recovery and your management of your health, it can all quickly become quite overwhelming. But do you have any idea why you think people with mental health issues might struggle more with their physical health, Anne-Marie?
Absolutely, and I think I'm glad that you did ask me about that, because it's something that I feel incredibly passionate about. The statistics are stark. The average life expectancy for somebody with long-term serious mental health issues is actually between 15 and 20 years less than somebody who does not have mental health issues. So therefore you might be looking at somebody in their 50s who maybe has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or something like that, and they will have the equivalent health, a physical health, of a 70-year-old, and therefore the same sort of life expectancy. So maybe perhaps if they're lucky, another 15 years of life after that, after they're 50, I mean, and maybe not the best health either. So they will have long-term conditions, more likely to have things like high blood pressure, diabetes, chronic obstructive airways disease, heart disease, and the reasons for that are many. So sadly, a lot of people with long-term mental health issues, and I'm talking about serious, sort of not just maybe the sort of lower level bit of anxiety or maybe a minor depressive disorder, but people who've got very serious mental health problems that are enduring and go on for many, many years, they will be often on medication that causes weight gain. And again, not just a little bit of weight gain, but they will cause significant obesity, and so this leads to diabetes, and diabetes then leads to problems with heart disease and stroke, increased risk of things like peripheral vascular disease, which is where you have problems with blood supply to lower limbs, so they're more likely to have amputations and all of that goes with it, and then obviously poor mobility, so they'll be getting joint problems and more likely to need hip replacement. So a multitude of problems from the drugs that cause them to put on weight. And then people who have long-term mental health issues are more likely to smoke, because they often do it because it's self-medicating, it calms them down. They're more likely to smoke cannabis, and again, cannabis can cause increased appetite and weight gain. But with smoking for many years, people develop chronic obstructive airways disease, and also obviously increased risk of not just lung cancer but lots of other cancers as well. So yeah, there's lots of reasons why sadly people who have mental health problems that are significant and long term do have lots of different physical illnesses at the same time, and also are less likely to live as long. So I think that, you know, that's a tragedy, and it's something that I feel personally extremely passionate about. And I guess, you know, the question is, well, what can we do about it? There are things that are trying to be done at the moment, but again, there are challenges that often make even projects with the best will in the world, projects that just don't either work or don't get off the ground. So at the moment, general practitioners are being paid extra money to do yearly health checks on people who are on long-term medication for mental health. So what should happen is these people should be offered, usually it's a half an hour appointment with either their doctor or their practice nurse. They have a chance to have their blood work done on an annual basis, so things like their kidney and liver function checked, and their lipid function, so, you know, cholesterol, things like that. They'll have their blood pressure checked. They'll have their heart and lung listened to. They'll have advice about weight and smoking and alcohol. And I should have mentioned, of course, obviously alcohol is another significant risk that people have. If they have a long-term mental health problem, they're more likely to have alcohol issues. So we've put that in place as a health service, which is great, but people with long-term mental health issues often live very chaotic lives. So either they don't access the appointment in the first place, or if they do get to the stage where they've made an appointment, if it's not at a time of day which is easy for them to get to that appointment, they'll probably miss the appointment. So you give somebody an appointment at 10 o'clock in the morning, they're probably still in bed because they're drowsy and sedated because of the medications they're taking, so they may not even be able to get up until midday. So, you know, what good is that appointment to them? Well, it's not any good at all. And then they often have difficulty getting to the appointment, so they might have woken up, but then it's the transport issue. How am I going to get there? How can I get the motivation to get to that appointment? Because they may well want to try and start looking after their physical health, but it's getting over that initial motivation. And I know that there are support workers that are offered, but again, they're often only given to people who are really significantly unwell. We should be doing that for far more people. So they don't have to be, you know, very, you know, qualified people. They don't have to be medically qualified or nursing qualified. They just need to be people maybe who are volunteering to support that person and help navigate them through physical health checks. So yeah, I mean, that's one thing that the health service is trying to do, to try and close the gap, but there are lots of difficulties before we get anywhere near, I think, closing that significant gap.
And it's very interesting you bring up this support worker role, because I know that's sort of how I've taken sort of my route into working in a more one-to-one working mental health environment.
You're doing that role, aren't you, Ollie, I think?
Yes, yeah, and I've been in that for a few months. It's like you said, there are so many sort of smaller elements that do build up to these massive sort of obstructions in accessing services, and through sort of, not through living fulfilling lives, but sort of things that are preventing people from being able to access what seemingly quite, for some people, would be quite an easy appointment or quite an easy task. There are all these little barriers that get in the way that are sort of almost invisible, I guess, to people who aren't sort of aware of the greater picture of mental health and all the smaller parts that do play a role in this. And going back, I guess, to that figure, just because it still stayed in my head, just the 15 to 20 years short reduced life expectancy, it's still shocking. I feel it's almost like it's a stop point. Like I can't quite wrap my head around.
It's terrible, isn't it? And that actually is a larger gap than we see in socially disadvantaged people. So usually for people who are middle class and are able to navigate services and eat the right food and exercise and do all the right things, and you compare them with somebody who is socially disadvantaged, maybe doesn't have the money to buy healthy food or doesn't have access to fresh fruit and vegetables because of where they live and all of that goes with it, poor housing, etc. The gap there is usually no more than 10 to 12 years. So the gap for mental health is even bigger than that. And the only thing actually that comes close to it is people who are in long-term custodial situations. So people in prisons who have perhaps been in there for maybe 5-10 years, their life expectancy will be between 15 and 20 years less than the average population. So why are we treating people who have got a health problem? We shouldn't be, prisoners shouldn't be in that situation either, but why are we treating people with a health problem and accepting that they are having that enormous span of life expectancy, and saying it's okay and it's the same as for people who are in prison for many, many years? It's not right at all.
It's not right at all in any means, and it's one of those figures where I think if it had been publicised a bit more, one would at least hope that there'd be a bit more outcry about it, because like you say, the fact that in some cases it's almost double the reduction of life expectancy from that of sort of socially disadvantaged people, it really does sit in, you really do sit and have to think about it and how we sort of work forwards as a society to address issues such as this, and I guess going earlier in the circle, I guess, to before people are reaching this stage, if we're thinking of sort of back to this focus that we sort of brought on with sort of early intervention and preventative measures, I guess what comes to mind is, I can't remember the exact figures, but I know they say that most mental illnesses are sort of become apparent whilst people are still sort of in their first sort of 20 years of life or so, and I think that they can sometimes first appear maybe around their mid to late teens, and sometimes then, if they're not addressed, reappear more prominently and more sort of rooted, I guess, in the early 20s. So I guess if we're taking this preventative viewpoint that I've been trying to do, what sort of educational adjustments should we start thinking about, do you think?
Well, I think people should be educated from school. I think, we talk to, I don't know, actually, I haven't been to school for a very long time, but I'm presuming that we talk to kids about physical health. So we need to also talk to them about mental health as well. And we need to, I suppose, give them different opportunities and different tools to keep themselves both physically and mentally healthy as well. And the two do go hand in hand. That's the other thing I think we forget, that the human body and the human mind are obviously intrinsically linked, and having a healthy body and a healthy mind do go hand in hand. So if we're teaching children at school what is a healthy diet to have, the fact that they shouldn't drink alcohol, and if they do, then keep it to below a certain level, and they shouldn't smoke, then we should also be helping them and teaching them how to keep their minds healthy. So be it things like positive thinking, mindfulness, meditation, whatever it might be, give them a variety of different options to keep their mind healthy. And it shouldn't be a bit weird that people do that. People should just have the ability to say, without any sort of stigma, like people say, well, I'm going to the gym, that's okay. People don't laugh at you or say, well, that's a bit weird, you know, if people then say, well, actually, I'm going to be doing my meditation during that time, you know, I can't see you, or do you know what I mean? It should be more normal that people are saying these things, because it's about looking after your mental health. Mental health shouldn't mean mental illness. Mental health should mean health. So it should be about keeping yourself healthy. So we should have more conversations about how we do that. And like I said, I think it goes back to education, about school, but also people in a leadership role as well, because people do have role models that they look up to. So you know, you do get more impressed if you see somebody that you admire going to the gym and keep looking after their physical body. So it's again about getting those people of influence to have a higher profile, and I think that is happening up to a point, unless it's just that I'm getting all of that in my media feed. I don't know, but I am seeing more things like, I don't know whether you two have heard of Jay Shetty, he wrote a book very recently. He used to be a monk, and he's now making a fortune, I think. He must be, because it looks like he is. He's making a fortune on Facebook and YouTube, and he does little vignettes of situations where people have a particularly confrontational situation, and he then speaks about how to try and turn it round and be more positive. And it's more things like that, really. That's what we need to see. As I said, it might be that I'm just getting it on my feed because of the things I look at. I don't know.
Oh, it's so wonderful to hear about projects and things like that, because as you say, it's these elements that people almost, I guess it's not really stigma, but almost sort of people look down as being a bit soft, a bit unimportant, because the focus should be always drawn back to sort of the real subjects of looking at maths and sciences and English, all the core ones, to get people those certain quota of GCSE pass grades, and it's sort of then bypassing, I guess, all these lifelong skills that are actually very essential to enabling people to use these qualifications in the first place.
Let's have a GCSE on health and well-being. That would be great. And again, you know, you see people in leadership roles, and I'm talking about sort of whether it be politicians or people on TV, you know, there's no problem with people talking about how I keep myself physically fit. You know, you see Boris on a bike, Rishi Sunak's got a Peloton. Is it a Peloton? I think that's what you call them. So why don't we also hear people say, you know, I've got this great new meditation app that I've downloaded, and it's fantastic, and it's really helped me. So we just need to raise awareness, really.
And I think raising awareness and raising education of both sorts of all the positives, but also not to take sort of a pessimistic view, but sort of also the negatives, I guess, of sort of how, when things go wrong, I guess the effects of it. Because I think sometimes people aren't fully aware of, especially at a younger age, or maybe they are, but I don't think fully aware of, I guess, the greater consequences that people's actions can have on mental health, or maybe sort of, if we're looking at maybe sort of, I don't know, bullying examples of sort of people picking on each other or thinking that they might be having a joke, sort of like the longer term effects these can have.
That's hugely damaging. Absolutely. That is what we now call, we never used to have this word before, but it's what we call now microaggression, isn't it? And it can be just little tiny things that, when you look at them as individual episodes, aren't anything much, but they add up. And as you say, bullying, it can be just really just little simple things, and bullying doesn't have to be people saying horrible things to you or being physically violent. It can be just exclusion, just excluding you from the group, or people turn their back on you, and okay, you know, maybe if you can cope with 1 or 2 episodes like that, your resilience can cope, but then when it happens again and again and again, that's when it adds up, and your resilience won't be able to cope with it. And it's like, okay, what do I do in those sort of situations? People need to have those examples talked about, and then offered solutions. Okay, so what do you do when that happens? Do you confront the situation? Do you go up and say, what's your problem? Why are you doing that to me? Or is it better as a strategy just to ignore it and just let it go away? Well, everyone's different, aren't they? One particular way of responding to that may be different for somebody else. So I think that, again, it's about raising awareness of what you do if you find yourself in those situations.
Mm-hmm. I think it is, isn't it? And even not just with I guess with that educational focus in schools, but also making sure that that is promoted, I guess, as well to the teachers and the staff, so they're aware of sort of maybe those who are struggling more, that the effects, I guess, on the mental health, maybe things might be taken more seriously and it less be seen as a kids being kids. But also, I guess, on the parents, I guess being aware of sort of being able to look after mental health, because I think linking sort of what we were saying earlier, when we're looking at who's the expert, service versus user, when we're thinking of family dynamics, it can have a massive impact, I guess, as to how educated a parent is, as to how well supported a child or service user can then be.
Definitely, yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, in an ideal world, you want your parents to be there, to have your back. You want to be able to come back home and talk to them about anything and not be judged. You want them to love you unconditionally, no matter what you might say, no matter who you might want to become as a person, as an adult, whatever profession you want to go into. You want them to absolutely approve of you and love you no matter what. But let's be honest, not all parents are like that, sadly. And so for those young people, they need to have something else, don't they? They need to have an alternative way of getting that support and having that unconditional love and approval. And I know we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but sometimes people then look for that approval and look for that love in the wrong places, and that can lead them into difficulties as well. So you don't want people to get to that situation. You want to give them the knowledge when they're, and I don't think you're ever too young to start. I remember people, we talked about it years ago, when would be the right time to talk to children about sex education in the family, for example. Well, my belief is that when you get to the stage where they ask you questions, it's too late, because they already know, and they know extremely probably know more than the parent. So if they're asking to see generally what your reaction is. So there's there's never too early, I think, to talk to children about sex education and things like that. So I think same with resilience and bullying. The children need to know from a very, very young age.
They really do. And I guess, like you said, the more that is then brought across, the more normalised it almost makes it in a way. Because if it is something that's swept under the rug and almost punished for being brought up, like we said earlier, it makes people less likely to want to bring up something like this again. Or it can then end up in people's potentially sort of seeing it as a negative thing. Let's take applying it to the example of mental health, asking sort of around it, or about like feeling low and having it maybe not dismissed but maybe misunderstood as sort of an aspect of just being someone's having a down day, or a bit of it's a hormonal moment or something like that. Whereas maybe if it is a longer ongoing issue and it's trivialized too much, we do sort of risk, like you say, that sort of disconnect then between the child with trust in their family or the child with wanting to access services.
Absolutely. Yep. And then, of course, you can have the opposite problem. Parents can be too pushy. It's about getting the balance right. You don't want to be too intrusive. You want to be there. And I'm not saying I've got it right for a second, but it's about being there and when you're needed, being able to step up, but equally you mustn't be too intrusive, and if you are forever saying, have you got a problem, do you want to talk to me, that you can then turn that young person off as well. So it's difficult, it's not easy being a parent.
I think I'm just going to add something as well, if that's going off kind of everything that we've talked about in terms of, it's never too early and role models and things like that. I think in both sort of the educational setting and also in family settings, I think it's important to not just sort of preach about things, but also practice what you preach. I think there's a lot of parents and teachers out there who tell kids, oh, it's okay to, speak up about how you're feeling and things like that, but aren't doing it themselves. And a lot of kids can pick up when there's issues going on with, their parents or teachers and things like that. And if the teachers and parents aren't keeping in check of their own well-being, that sort of almost filters through, I think. And I think children pick up on a lot more than people realise. And if their parents are struggling, a lot of kids won't reach out to their parents because they don't want to make it worse. So I think it's having that sort of honesty and practicing what you preach a little bit, because it's so important. And how are you meant to help your child if you're not also, helping yourself?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's really, really important, and it almost creates this environment of positivity and keeping in check of your own well-being. If you see your parents practicing, things like mindfulness and not being afraid to talk about mental health and things like that, their own mental health especially, then it passes on that sort of environment that it's okay, and that's what we need. We need more generations to be raised in those sorts of environments, and it shall slowly trickle through and hopefully move forward and progress.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Bry, I think, as you say, it will change. It's just going to take that little bit of time. But your generation, I'm hoping, will have a different way of raising your children and so on. So it's better than it was. If I look at the way I was raised, we didn't talk about anything like this. We didn't talk about mental health, we didn't talk about sex, we didn't talk about drugs, whereas now it's normal. So I think things will get better. I'm optimistic anyway.
As you should be.
We'll lead the future, don't worry.
Good. The young people give me hope.
They do. They are the future. Was that Whitney who was famous for that? But yes, I think it's very true. It's never easy being a parent and seeing things like that, but it's good to always be able to acknowledge, I guess, the progression and be a part in that. I think that's one of the greatest things, is maybe it's not been how you would have liked to see it for one person's sort of group of peers, but being able to fight against the tide is very inspirational.
Indeed.
But,
well,
yes.
It's positive point to reach, isn't it, really?
Yes, definitely. And whilst we're on this nice positive note, I think we've maybe start to draw to a close. I think we've covered some amazing points, and I feel we've got a very nice atmosphere and could keep speaking.
We could talk forever, couldn't we? Could go on all day. Except I have to say, it's getting very cold in the room that I'm sitting in.
I think we'll have to invite you back, because I feel like there's loads more that we could talk about.
Oh, it would be a pleasure. I'd love to. Of course.
Oh, well, thank you so much to both of you for all the amazing conversations you've brought in today. It's been an absolute delight to be able to facilitate this. And to all our listeners out there, if you've liked today's podcast and wanted to know any more, please feel free to contact us through the email and through any of our social media channels, which is at CYPAPT MidYA with an S on the end for our Twitter handle, and then at Midlands_YA for Instagram, or you can find the website with www.associateddevelopment-solutions.com/the-Midland-young-advisors. But before we round this to a close and people say goodbye, is there any final notes that you would like to leave our listeners on today, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would like people to take home, if there's a take-home message, would be, if you feel that you're in difficulty, if you feel that you're struggling, if you feel that you're unhappy, you probably are. In fact, you definitely are. And seek help. Don't hesitate. Don't just think, oh, I'm making a fuss, or it'll go away, or it'll get better. Do seek help. And I'm hoping that Ollie's going to probably say where you can perhaps signpost people to. I mean, obviously, go to see your GP. That's the first thing. I know not every GP necessarily can be maybe as open and minded and accommodating. If that's the case, go and see a different GP, and keep changing and go and see another GP until you get the answer that you want. And failing that, if you do feel that you're really struggling, there are places that you can call and people that you can talk to, and obviously the Samaritans is the main one, but there are lots of resources out there available to help you. So that would be my main message.
And a perfect one, I think, to round up the podcast on. And yes, like you said, we will attach some links underneath to maybe Samaritans and other resources people can access. And it's actually made me think that maybe we need to do a podcast at one point about what resources are out there and how to access a mental health service more. So maybe that could be something great to put in the diary for another podcast. But yes, before we go on much further with that, I'd like to just thank everyone once again. And I'm Ollie. I've been your host for today. I'm signing off now, and I'd like to hand over to Marie and Bry just to say their goodbyes, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Okay, cheers everybody. Goodbye. Have a good day. Thank you.